Who is Jesus? What is his mission? As the story moves and Jesus moves beyond the region of Galilee, the miraculous signs all point to his identity as the promised Messiah and King of God's kingdom. What miracle will happen next? What do the miracles mean? Will the disciples understand where all of this is leading? Let's pick up where we left off in the story.
Well, hello everybody. Good to be back. I've been out of the pocket here for the past month or so, a little bit of rest, a little bit of writing, and it was a really good break. It's really good to be back as well. I'm thankful for our amazing preaching team who held it down while I was gone, and some of you may recognize as we get into today's message. Some of you may recognize this guy. His name is Gary V. He's a businessman. He's an entrepreneur, an influencer, an author, specifically around the subject of being successful. What does personal greatness look like? And here's some quotes from Gary V. He says, "I'm grinding when you are sleeping." He says, "You must choose an area where you can win. No, scratch that. Not just win, but actually dominate. After all, don't we have enough mediocre?" And then he says, "Innovation isn't a tactic, it's a religion." So he's one of a long line of success gurus. And the truth is, all of those things sound great. Those quotes are fantastic, that they're attractive to our modern Western ears. Our whole society is built around the idea of upward mobility, which defines our concept of greatness. Now, here are a few truths about this idea of greatness. So we all admire greatness. When we spot it, there's something admirable about it. Maybe it's your favorite musician. You follow their Instagram. You have their t-shirts and all their playlists. Or maybe it's an athlete that's your particular favorite. It's not necessarily public knowledge, but you wear their jersey as your jammies. Or if it could be someone you really admire in your field of business or your study, or maybe your favorite filmmaker or author. Whoever it might be, we all admire greatness when we see it. It's also true at some level that we all desire greatness. So in some area of your life, you're trying to be great in who you're trying to become. So maybe it's aspiring to be great at your career, or to be a great friend, or to be a great spouse or parent. Even if we don't want all the accolades that go with it, at some level we all desire greatness. But more important than either of these to our discussion today is this third truth. We all define greatness. So if I gave you a few minutes here to think about it and asked you to picture in your mind what greatness looks like, you'd be able to do it. And for most of you, that picture would be largely defined by our cultural view of success. Probably just takes something that you admire or aspire to and moves it up and to the right. In our high-octane society, the word up is cherished, almost worshipped. Step up, level up, pick it up. It's reserved for the winners, the heroes, the successful. It's a word to be admired and pursued. It's a word of the strong. Down, on the other hand, in the vocabulary of the world, is a word reserved for losers, for cowards, the bear market. Let it be a letdown, a step down, downcast. Down is the destiny of the unfortunate, the weak, the poor. That's how people through history have always defined greatness. But when Jesus came onto the scene, he gave a whole different definition. Here's today's big idea. Jesus demonstrates that downward mobility is the path to true greatness. Now today I want to explore, what does it look like to descend into greatness? We're going to be in Mark chapter 9 today, starting in verse 30. You can turn there in your Bible or find your way there on your device. But the text begins like this. It says, "They went on from there and passed through Galilee, and he did not want anyone to know, for he was teaching his disciples." And so here we begin a section that appears to be made up of some unrelated sayings of Jesus, almost like standalone proverbs. But upon closer inspection, Jesus is actually preparing his disciples for his death and for their mission after his death. So each of these sayings has an underlying theme of humility and suffering. He's getting them ready. And he sent the crowds away because he needed some alone time with his disciples. He has some important teaching crafted just for them. So here in verse 30 is the last reference in Mark to Galilee until after the resurrection. Up until now, Galilee has been Jesus' base of operations. It's the place where he called the disciples. It's the place where he taught massive crowds. And so there's almost some melancholy in the tone of the text as Galilee is no longer in his sights. From here on, he'll move toward Jerusalem, toward his death. Now, look at verse 31. It says, he was teaching his disciples, saying to them, the Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him. And when he's killed, after 3 days, he will rise. This is Jesus' second passion prediction, the prediction of his death. And this instance includes new details, that he is going to be betrayed, that he's going to be delivered into the hands of men. This little detail should be throwing up warning signs, red flags in the minds of his disciples. Who is going to betray Jesus? But instead, we see their reaction in verse 32. It says, but they did not understand the saying, and they were afraid to ask him. And so their response here is this combination of ignorance and fear. They're afraid, and they were afraid to ask. And so why were they afraid to ask? Was it because Jesus was so mean and they didn't want to get yelled at by this abusive leader? No, that's not what's happening. I just don't think they wanted to imagine their lives without Jesus. And this is the beginning of our latest example of this discipleship failure theme in Mark. Jesus is spelling it out pretty plainly what's going to happen to him, but they still don't understand, and they're too afraid to ask him. But it's going to get worse. Not only don't they understand that he's about to get crucified, but we find out in the next few verses that they've actually been preoccupied arguing with each other about who's going to be the greatest in his kingdom. So this juxtaposition between Jesus coming suffering and humility and the disciples' debate about who's the greatest is this glaring sign. And this happens in Mark's gospel at all three, actually, of Jesus' passion predictions. The first prediction was followed by Peter's rebuke. The third prediction is going to be followed by the request of James and John to sit at Jesus' right and his left. And here at the second prediction, we have this argument over greatness between the disciples. In all three of these cases, the disciples are voicing their desire for status and for prestige, and Jesus is providing a stark contrast of what true greatness actually looks like. The picture that comes to my mind when I read this is like 12 Kentucky Derby horse jockeys, all 4'9" of them, walking behind Shaquille O'Neal, arguing over who's the tallest. It's like, hey, guys, we're not even talking about the same category here. And so this is the same with greatness and Jesus. And in his response, Jesus begins to redefine greatness and talk about his approach of what I would call downward mobility being the key to this life. So I'd like to frame the rest of our passage this way. These are three insights into Jesus' radical redefinition of greatness. Look at verse 33. And they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you discussing on the way?" But they kept silent, for on the way, they had been arguing with one another about who was the greatest. It was like they got caught by their dad with their hand in the cookie jar. He's like, hey, what were you guys talking about? So the first surprising insight that I want you to notice is this. Jesus doesn't rebuke a desire for greatness. It's incredible here in his response, but he didn't rebuke the disciples for their debate. And he wasn't shy about rebuking people. So it's very important that we learn to rightly perceive ambition. Ambition and pride are not always the same thing. Jesus was ambitious, not proud. Paul was ambitious, not proud. You can be ambitious and not be driven by pride. I mean, there's probably a part of this story that just comes down to the disciples being around Jesus all the time, and Jesus was great, and so they wanted to become great like him. There's something about being around greatness that calls out greatness in you. Like if you're an athlete, or you're kind of an athlete, or maybe you used to be an athlete, and you see some dude dunking on TV, and you think, well, that's amazing, I've got to try that. And you try it, and then, they do surgery, and then you recover, and then but for a moment, that greatness inspires you to try something great, or you watch a cooking show on the Food Network, and all of a sudden you're in the kitchen like, I'm going to make this ham sandwich awesome, or a home improvement show, and you're trying to, install shiplap the next day in your bathroom or whatever. You're inspired by someone that's great at something, and so you try to up your game, you try to improve, you try to do better, and maybe that's what's going on here with the disciples. Jesus is revealed in all of his greatness, and the disciples are seeing him day in and day out, and some of it's just starting to rub off, and they're like doing miracles and stuff, and they think, man, there's so much more that we could be. There's so much more that we could do and to know. We've got to up our game. And so what might greatness look like for us? And so they get in this heated discussion over it. That's possible. There's also a prideful seeking after greatness that's wrong and sinful. The Bible calls it selfish ambition. And this is a huge trap for many people. But not all ambition for greatness is motivated by pride. And so do you not want to be a great friend, for example? Do you not want to have a great marriage? Do you not want to be a great parent? Do you not want to have a great prayer life or great theology or great ministry? Do you not want to have a great impact in life? And by the way, when you need surgery, are you not looking for someone who is trying to be a great surgeon? You don't say, you know what, I don't want some surgeon who's aspiring to be great at what she does to cut me open. How arrogant could you be? No, I'm not looking for a mediocre surgeon. See, we don't do that. Like, you want your airplane pilot to aspire for greatness. You want your brake mechanic to aspire for greatness. You want your plumber to aspire for greatness. You would like your spouse, by the way, to aspire for greatness if you're married. And so this idea that aspiration and ambition is always sinful is just wrong. And so Jesus doesn't rebuke his disciples about their argument over greatness. And so we need to be careful. Let's not come up with a bunch of holy excuses for not pursuing godly greatness. Some people are like, well, I'm just humble, so I'm not going to take risks, or I'm not going to act courageously to try to be better. That's ambition. I'm just trying to be humble. And so I'm just going to drive around in second gear my whole life and not maximize the gifts and talents and resources God has given me. Is that holy? No, that's just lazy. See, the truth is we should desire greatness. We're built for greatness. We long for greatness. A desire for greatness isn't bad. What we need to be mindful of is that desire, like any desire, can become corrupted by sin. So nowhere does Jesus criticize a person for pursuing true significance, because he created us to be significant. But that desire can get corrupted. And it seems like the disciples are kind of teetering right on that edge, this temptation towards selfish ambition. But he doesn't squash their desires. He redirects them. He doesn't destroy their dreams. He describes a new pathway upon which their longing for greatness will become beautiful. And so they come to Jesus and they say, we want to be great. And he doesn't say, hey, good, go pursue, upward mobility just like the rest of the world. No, but he also doesn't say, oh, no, don't aspire to greatness. That's really bad and evil. Here's what he says. He says, okay, you want greatness. Let me tell you how to be great. It's the second insight I want you to see. It's that Jesus reimagines greatness as humble servanthood. Look at verse 35. It says, and he sat down, and he called the 12, and he said to them, if anyone would be first, he must be last of all and servant of all. And he took a child, and he put him in the midst of them. And taking him in his arms, he said to them, whoever receives one such child in my name receives me. And whoever receives me receives not me, but him who sent me. And so this section begins here with Jesus sitting down. This is a power move of an authoritative rabbi. Today, when people in authority stand up, when they're in authority, they stand up to speak. In those days, it was just the opposite. When someone sat down, everyone gathered around to listen. And so he sits. He says, okay, let me tell you how to be great. Let me tell you how to truly achieve it. In fact, let me pull back the curtain of heaven and describe to you what greatness really looks like in the eyes of God. And right after he says this, he pulls up a child, a little kid. I imagine him kind of spotting the little boy in the crowd with a fudge sickle smeared all over his face and, one pant leg up and one pant leg down and snot nose and bedhead. It's an interesting moment for this kid because people in that day did not really recognize children. Children were not honored like they are today. Kids were a necessary nuisance until they became contributing adults. And so he pulls up this kid. But notice in this case, the disciples are not called to be like the child. They're called to be like Jesus who receives the children. He says, if you want to be great, you need to hang out with kids more because kids are going to teach you a lot about servanthood. Why? Because there's no payoff in serving children. They don't thank you endlessly for your attentiveness and care. They don't give speeches about how great is your helpfulness. In fact, they pretty much take for granted that you kept them alive. They don't make a big deal out of the fact that you pour your life out for them. And so children hold up a mirror to help determine whether you live to serve others or whether you live to be praised yourself, whether you're truly great or not. And that's why our kids workers, by the way, around the church are such heroes. They are a picture of true servanthood. So the words he said were, If you want to be first, you must be a servant of all. Now, I want to do some definitions here. The word here for servant is the word diakonos, which is the word we get from where we get our word deacon. But it means literally to wait on tables. So Jesus is lifting up this value of servanthood, of humility. Humility, by the way, is not the same as humiliation. Humility is not low self-esteem. It's not demeaning your talents or achievements. In fact, John Dixon, in his great book, Humilitas, defines humility this way. He says it's the noble choice to forgo your own status and use your influence for the good of others before yourself. So remember, Jesus is not condemning the quest for greatness. He's radically reimagining it. And so go ahead and pursue being great, he says. But the path is down, not up. Paul says it well in Philippians 2. He says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, there's that word, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interest, but each of you to the interest of others. A related idea that we talk about often is servant leadership. Servant leadership has always been a staple of Christianity, but it's a bit of a confusing concept. I don't know about you, but the picture in my mind for many years when I heard the word servant leader is just a kind of soft, gentle, kind, kind of mamsy-pamsy, anything goes kind of leader. But that wasn't Jesus. He's the ultimate servant leader, but that's not who he was. He was strong. He was decisive. He set agendas. He held people accountable. He spoke hard truths. He had difficult conversations. He was not Mr. Rogers with a beard, putting on his cardigan and his easy shoes. And so what does servant leadership actually mean? Well, I think first he makes it clear that it's a rejection of the leadership of the world that holds high the values of power and intimidation and coercion. But more than what it rejected is what he focused on. Servant leadership means being dialed in to what is best for the people we lead and then connecting them to their divine purpose. That's what Jesus did again and again. And we do that whether or not there are accolades attached to that. I think about Gio, who's trying to run his gym in a way that would honor Christ. He's lifting up the well-being of others, not just their physical health, but their spiritual health. I think about Tracy running a nonprofit for families who suffer infant loss, getting called out at all times of day or night to serve them and putting their needs above her needs. I think about Mark, a school administrator, trying to run his department in a way where everyone is seen and everyone is valued as Christ would. Or Scott, who's trying to see his retirement years through the lens of how many people can he serve for the kingdom. You see, greatness in God's economy is not just reserved for the gifted or the privileged. Rather, it's within the reach of all Christians, as long as there is a posture of the humble service of others. What's wild is that it's Jesus who started this humility revolution in all of human history. You know that until the time of Jesus, humility and servanthood was not seen as a strength. It was seen as a great weakness in society. In fact, one of the prized virtues in ancient Greece was the love of honor, the pursuit of personal prestige. And so how is it that we've come to prize humility? How is it that we find ourselves in 2024 with leading secular business experts, Jim Collins, writing secular leadership books saying that one of the number one attributes of the top CEOs of the top companies in our whole nation, one of the best attributes is humility. How did it become such a virtue? Well, here's how we wound up here. A humility revolution took place in the middle of the first century, and it started with an itinerant teacher from Nazareth named Jesus. And today we reject arrogance and we admire humility. In fact, we only really like to be around people who possess a measure of humility. The braggy show-offs are just annoying. And it's not just Christians. Everyone appreciates this level of humility. It hasn't always been like that. But it started with Jesus. And it started with a new definition of greatness. Look at verse 38 for the third and final insight about greatness. And John said to him, "Teacher, we saw someone casting out demons in your name, and we tried to stop him because he was not following us." But Jesus said, "Do not stop him. For no one who does a mighty work in my name will be able soon afterward to speak evil of me. For the one who is not against us is for us. For truly I say to you, whoever gives you a cup of water to drink because you belong to Christ will by no means lose his reward." Here's the third insight. It's that true greatness rejects comparisons to others. So after the report about this argument between the disciples about who's the greatest, John comes to Jesus at kind of a tattletale moment, and he reports that there's this man who's casting out demons, and this man needs to be stopped. And the reason, John says, is because he is not following, look at this, us. Notice he doesn't say he's not following you, Jesus. He's not following us. So kind of a little presumptuous here. John is trying to draw these clear lines. He wants to be sure everyone knows who's in and who's out. The child that Jesus just held may be in, but this man must surely be out because he's not one of us, even though he's casting out demons in Jesus' name. See, in many ancient societies, if exorcists wanted to cast a demon out of someone, they would cast it out not in their own name, but in the name of someone stronger than them. So Jesus says, hey, he's using my name. Maybe he's a friend. Let's treat him like a friend. But John sees an outsider who doesn't fit his mold of what he thinks a follower of Christ looks like. He's comparing. Unironically, a couple of chapters ago, the disciples themselves couldn't even cast out a demon in Jesus' name. But here's this random man seems to be having no problem doing it himself. And Jesus responds saying, hey, John, you just live the life I gave you to live, and let me worry about the rest. Think of it this way. Whoever's not against us, says Jesus, is for us. One of the biggest traps that prevents us from the greatness Jesus has in mind for us is comparison. It's constantly looking around at what everyone else is doing. And comparison will bring you down. Maybe you wanted to be married and you're single, or maybe you're married and you wanted to be single, or maybe you wanted to have kids and you can't have kids. Maybe you wanted to be healthy but you're sick. Maybe you wanted to be rich but you're poor. Maybe you wanted to be funny and you're just awkward. It happens. And it's hard not to compare ourselves to others. We look at their success. We look at their status. We look at their accomplishments, maybe their car, maybe their house, maybe even their talents, maybe their looks, and we start to compare ourselves. And with social media, it's never been so easy to compare your life with another person's life. The problem is that on Pinterest or Instagram or Facebook, you're comparing your real normal moments to their best moments. And when you see that someone else has accomplished something that maybe you've been laboring toward for many years, instead of congratulations, seeds of discontent can take root in your soul. And comparison isn't new. Cain compared himself to Abel, tragically. Here, John is comparing himself to this random dude walking around casting out demons. But comparisons lead to covetousness, and there will always be people with more. And have you noticed that we always compare up and we don't compare down? Like perhaps rather than always comparing ourselves to those that have more than we do, maybe we need to compare ourselves to those who have less, and by doing so realize how much we actually have, that we would foster gratitude and contentment rather than envy and jealousy. So Jesus says, stop looking around at what everyone else is doing. Just worry about, he says this phrase, if you belong to Christ. He says someone might give you a cup of water if you belong to Christ, and that's a good thing. See, Jesus starts attaching John's identity back to Jesus. Just stick with me, John, and you'll be good. Why? Because, hear me clearly, your only shot at greatness is tied to the greatness of God. I remember teaching my boys to swing a bat. I'd stand behind them, I'd put my hands over their hands, and when the pitch came in, I would swing. And it looked kind of like this picture here, me behind them. And I could help them swing much harder and faster than they could ever do on their own. And one day I was swinging with Chase, and we really got a hold of one. And he turned around to me and he said, Dad, I'm a home run hitter. And I didn't have the heart to explain to him that technically he was not the home run hitter, but I was the home run hitter. I was the one doing the heavy lifting. His job was to put his hands on the bat, make sure my hands were on the bat, and to just swing when I swung. Home run. And this is a picture of how our faith and God's faithfulness work together. Our job is to step up to whatever plate he asks us to, make sure his hands are on the bat, and swing away. Without Christ, we're nothing. But since we have Christ, we have everything. Let me ask you, what does redefining greatness according to the ways of Jesus look like for you? What does it look like to live your life with the greatness Jesus has in mind for you? I don't want you to get caught up in tying that picture to your church life. I want you to tie it to your real life. What does it mean to be a businessman who's committed to humble servanthood? What does it mean to be a doctor, a teacher, a mom, a husband, a neighbor, a student, a shop worker, an insurance adjuster, a workout partner? What does it look like to live a life that honors God in those settings, that serves God in those arenas. Imagine Jesus saying to you, like he said to his disciples, you want to be great? Let's talk about how to do that. The path is one of humble service. One of our new discipleship roles is called embedded influencer. We believe every person at Grace is an embedded influencer. The description goes like this: I understand how God has purposefully gifted and positioned me to multiply his work in the world. We believe every Christian at Grace is called to be an influence in the lives of people around them, whatever family or job or friend group or hobby group you are embedded in. Your role in that group isn't passive. You are an influencer of others. I continue to be amazed by Grace Church's collective potential. I believe we are uniquely positioned to change our whole region. And it's because of our size and because of our reach and the variety of gifts and strategic roles, we are poised to bring true change. There is nowhere I go these days where someone doesn't come up to me in a grocery store, in a restaurant, at a gym, on the sidewalk, and they say, hey, you're that pastor at Grace, right? My friend goes to your church, or my coworker goes to your church, my boss goes to your church, my teacher, my client, the server at my favorite coffee shop, they go to your church. There's not a day that goes by where I don't think Grace is everywhere. Our embedded influence goes wide and it goes deep. And we're working and even leading in every sector of our local community. And so here at Grace, we're in process of reimagining church, not just inside the walls, but outside the walls as well, where we live, where we work, and where we play. Which means the purpose of your job is not being great in the world's eyes. The primary role of your work should not be, A, make a lot of money, or B, find an identity and achieve some status. When you do work for one of those two motivations, work will either become too important or too unimportant. If it's too important, you're going to throw yourself too far into it and allow it to consume you and to the detriment of every other area of your life. If it's too unimportant, you're just going to do it to get a paycheck. But there's a third way, and that is to connect your work to God's work, to see God as your ultimate boss and to see your role in the place you work as an embedded influencer for his kingdom. The description said that you'll understand that God has purposely gifted you and positioned you. And there's two questions that we're asking that kind of go with that in the My Influence tool that we're going to unleash here soon. But it goes along with this discipleship role. And the questions are, what has God given me and where has God placed me? Ask yourself, what are the gifts, abilities, and passions that God has given me, put inside of me? And then ask, and where has he positioned me to extend influence to others? If you find yourself at work as an embedded influencer for Christ, with your work connected to God's work, you're going to begin to redefine the real bottom lines of your work. And instead of it being all about P&L reports or sales growth or how many goods you produced or working your way up some invisible ladder, maybe you'll adopt something like these 4 reimagined bottom lines at work. Who can I demonstrate God's love to today? How can my community be better served by what I do? How can I model excellence and hard work to those around me? How can my God-given gifts be maximized in my current position? See, according to Jesus' redefinition of greatness, these are the kinds of things that we aspire to. And you just start learning to serve right where you are. Don't start by trying to be Mother Teresa. You're never going to make it there. You'll give up before you begin. Start by asking, what has God given me and where has God placed me? And pretty soon it's going to start affecting how you treat your boss and how you make time for your coworker, or how you treat your supervisor, or how you negotiate against your competitor, and just see how your heart begins to grow. Will you follow Jesus when you don't get the credit? And see how your faith begins to deepen. See what true greatness in life really tastes like, and you'll start to want more of it. Start practicing God's way of being great right where you are. According to Jesus' definition, greatness goes like this. Anyone who wants to be first must be the very last and the servant of all. Jesus gave us a whole new way to play the game. I'm reminded of an old story that I've told before, but it's from Jim Roberts, a 4th grade teacher. He was overseeing an end-of-the-year field day at his elementary school, and they were playing a game called Balloon Stomp. Each kid had a balloon tied around both ankles, and when the whistle blew, they would see who could stomp on the most balloons of other kids' ankles without getting their own balloons popped. It was a ruthless game, a kind of Darwinian survival of the fittest game. Everyone was out for himself. And if you win, I lose, and if I win, you lose, and every balloon that I pop puts me closer to the top. And this went on all day. But when the last class came through, Robert's got kind of a sick feeling in his stomach. Something felt wrong. It was a special needs class, kids with all degrees of mental and emotional challenges, and he thought, oh, this is going to end bad. They shouldn't go through this. But the balloons were tied, the instructions were given, the whistle blew, and the game was on. The special needs kids really didn't concern themselves with the rules of the game. They just knew that there were balloons, and the really fun thing to do with balloons was to pop them. And something profoundly beautiful happened that brought tears to Teacher Jim's eyes. They didn't play the game as the other classes had. They all started working together to pop every balloon. One kid bent down and held his own balloon in place like a football and waited for his friend, the place kicker, to come by and pop the balloon. And every time a balloon popped, everyone screamed with delight. And they helped each other until every last balloon was popped with a great round of applause. And it was a completely different game where nobody lost and everybody was included. And I have 2 questions for you. Question 1, which class got the game right? And question 2, which game are you playing? Because maybe, just maybe, in Christ's new definition of greatness, it's not just about winning. It's about making sure everyone around you wins too. We have a discipleship question that goes along with this discipleship failure theme in Mark, and I'd love for you to meditate on this question in your chair time this week. It just asks this: what is holding me back from looking more like Jesus? I love you guys.